Monica Carter was driving her Mercedes S-Class through an upscale neighborhood, the lights from the windows of the luxurious homes reflecting on the road. She felt relaxed in the quiet atmosphere of the evening, but suddenly, the traffic light turned green, and as she turned onto the main road, the police car behind her activated its sirens and flashing lights. "Pull over immediately." The sound of the siren startled her. Monica frowned but didn't feel anxious, calmly pulling over to the side of the road. She knew she hadn't violated any traffic laws, but a sense of discomfort still arose as she saw the officer stepping out of his vehicle. He was a white male, around 40 years old, with a stern look, his hand resting on his gun belt. "License and registration, please," the officer requested. Monica slowly opened her bag, pulled out her registration and license, and handed them to him. The officer took them, flipped through them, and then looked up, eyeing her suspiciously. "Are you sure this car is yours?" he asked, his tone unfriendly. Monica felt tense but tried to remain calm. She was used to situations like this, where others judged her simply by the color of her skin. She responded, "Of course. My name is on the registration." However, the officer was still unsatisfied. He continued flipping through the paperwork before saying, "I received a report about a stolen car with the same license plate number. You'll need to come with me to the station." Monica immediately understood that the officer was making up a story. She didn't want to cause any trouble, so she decided to stay silent and let things play out, hoping she would find a way to resolve the situation later. Monica was taken to the station, remaining quiet throughout the ride. She wondered if her life would always involve situations like this, just because she was a black woman in this society. But she couldn't let worry control her. She would fight to protect justice. 3 days later, Monica was brought to court with charges of unauthorized use of a vehicle and resisting an officer. However, she didn't feel anxious. She knew she had a powerful card that would silence everyone. The courtroom was filled with curious and judgmental glances. The judge, a white man around 60 years old, sat on the high bench with a contemptuous expression. He flipped through the case file and then looked up at Monica. "So, this is the defendant. Someone like you driving a Mercedes S-Class. Ridiculous." The whole courtroom burst into laughter, making Monica feel out of place. But she remained calm, her sharp gaze fixed on the judge. Officer Whitaker stood up confidently and began to present his testimony. He recounted the story that Monica had behaved suspiciously while driving through the upscale neighborhood. And he didn't believe the car belonged to her. "Someone like you, how could you own that car?" Whitaker said, looking at her with suspicion. A few people in the courtroom nodded in agreement, clearly believing the officer's story. The doubtful glances turned back to Monica. She didn't say anything, simply observing and waiting. But just a few minutes later, everything changed. Monica stood up and presented irrefutable evidence, a video clip of the incident that day, captured by a security camera in the neighborhood. In the video, Officer Whitaker could be seen talking to another person before approaching Monica's Mercedes. The footage clearly showed that he had planned the situation in advance. The entire courtroom fell silent, no one dared to even breathe. Officer Whitaker stood motionless, his face turning pale, no longer exuding the same confidence as before. The judge, after watching the video, no longer held his contemptuous expression. He remained silent for a moment, then looked at Monica. "Thank you for providing the evidence, Ms. Carter. The trial will continue to be reviewed." Monica felt the truth had been exposed. She stood tall, her eyes filled with confidence, not just because of the victory, but because she had dared to confront injustice. She knew that no matter the outcome, she had done the right thing. When it was Monica's turn to speak, she stood up and approached the witness stand. Without rushing, she pulled a black leather card holder from her pocket and placed it on the table in front of the judge. The United States Secret Service (USSS) badge gleamed under the lights. The entire courtroom immediately fell silent. The judge stared at the badge, his face turning pale, his hand shaking. Officer Whitaker, who had been confident just moments ago, now stood frozen, his mouth agape in shock. Monica spoke calmly but firmly. "I am an agent of the United States Secret Service. I will sue you for unlawful detention." The courtroom erupted. Those present couldn't believe what they had just heard. Whitaker panicked, not daring to look at Monica. The judge, after a few seconds of silence, spoke. "So, the defendant is a federal agent. I will review the evidence." Officer Whitaker lowered his head, unable to face Monica. She stood tall, saying nothing further. Knowing, that everything had changed. The courtroom grew quiet again. Those present began to realize that Monica was not just a vulnerable defendant but a powerful agent. The judge no longer exuded his previous confidence, his eyes filled with uncertainty. A moment later, the judge decided. The trial will be adjourned for further evidence review. The charges will be reinvestigated. Monica didn't need to do anything more. She had proven that justice didn't just belong to the powerful, but was also the right of those who dared to stand up for the truth. Everyone realized that Monica was not just an agent but a symbol of justice and resistance against injustice. The USSS badge shone brightly under the lights. On the table, the words were clearly written. United States Secret Service Federal Agent. The entire courtroom seemed frozen for a moment. Judge Foster, who had mocked Monica just seconds ago, suddenly lost all his arrogant composure. His hand shook as he tried to maintain his calm. Officer Whitaker's face turned pale, his body stiff. He couldn't believe that the woman he had just framed with false charges was actually a high-ranking federal agent. Whispers began to spread across the courtroom. Some of the jurors gaped, while others looked at each other in disbelief. Monica stood tall, arms crossed in front of her chest, her sharp gaze fixed on the judge. "Do you still want to laugh, Judge Foster?" No one dared to speak. Judge Foster swallowed hard, beads of sweat starting to form on his forehead. I didn't know you were a federal agent." Monica raised an eyebrow, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Really? Or did you just think I was a black woman who didn't deserve to drive a Mercedes?" The judge couldn't respond. He had just been exposed right in front of the courtroom. Monica turned to Officer Whitaker, her voice colder than ever. "You said I acted suspiciously when driving through an upscale area. Do you know that I've worked in the White House? That I've protected the President of the United States?" Officer Whitaker's mouth hung open, his whole body trembling. He knew he was finished. No one in the courtroom dared to underestimate Monica anymore. At that moment, the scales of justice began to tilt in her favor. And that was when she decided to strike even harder. Monica stood up and approached the witness stand. She opened her briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of files, and placed it on the table in front of the judge. Inside the file were undeniable pieces of evidence. Traffic camera footage proving she hadn't violated any traffic laws. Witness testimony confirming that Officer Whitaker had lied. And FBI reports exposing Whitaker's past misconduct. The courtroom erupted. Whispers filled the air. And the jury began to doubt the authenticity of the case. Those who had previously supported Officer Whitaker now started to question his testimony. Monica remained unfazed. She slammed the file down onto the table, making everyone's eyes in the room turn toward her. She locked eyes with Judge Foster, her gaze sharp and confident. "What do you think now, Judge Foster? Still want to charge me?" Judge Foster, who had once controlled the courtroom, no longer had his confidence. He lowered his head, his hands trembling, unable to find a rebuttal. I think we need to review the entire case," the judge said, his voice weak. Monica simply smiled lightly, her lips curling with confidence. She didn't need to say anything more. What she had done spoke volumes. "That's what I wanted to hear," Monica said, as a statement that she had won. The courtroom fell silent. Everyone realized that Monica had cleared all doubts. The evidence was irrefutable, and the case could no longer continue in the direction Whitaker and Judge Foster had hoped for. After a long silence, Judge Foster made his decision. The trial will be adjourned to review the evidence. The charges against the defendant will be reinvestigated. Monica didn't need to do anything more. She had proven the truth, and justice was on her side. Officer Whitaker stood there, his face pale, unable to believe what had just happened. Everyone in the room recognized that he was no longer trustworthy. Monica didn't show any emotion. But inside, she knew she had achieved what she set out to do. She had protected the truth, and justice would be served. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense to the point of suffocation. The only person who remained calm was Monica Carter. Officer Whitaker, the one who had fabricated the entire false story about her, now looked pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He glanced around, desperately searching for an escape. Judge Foster remained seated, but he no longer dared to look Monica in the eye. His hands trembled as he flipped through the case files. Meanwhile, the whispers in the courtroom grew louder. The jurors turned to each other, whispering in shock. Monica took a step forward, her voice ringing out powerfully, breaking the tense silence. "I am not just a federal agent. I am one of the senior security officers who has protected the President of the United States. I have safeguarded the most important leaders of this country, and today I stand here to protect myself from an unjust system." The courtroom fell silent. No one could imagine that the woman the judge and the officer had tried to humiliate had such an impressive background. But Monica wasn't finished. She turned to Officer Whitaker, her gaze as cold as steel. "Now, tell me, Officer Whitaker, why was I arrested?" Whitaker opened his mouth but couldn't speak. He tried to come up with a reasonable answer, but he knew anything he said now could be immediately debunked. Instead of responding, he turned to the judge with a pleading look. But Judge Foster, whom he had thought would protect him, could do nothing for him now. Monica nodded, as if she had already anticipated this moment. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents, filled with irrefutable evidence. Evidence against Officer Whitaker. Traffic camera footage showing that Monica hadn't violated any laws. A copy of an internal police report revealing that Whitaker had been investigated for racial discrimination in previous cases. FBI reports detailing his other misconduct, including falsifying evidence in past cases. The courtroom gasped as the evidence was presented. This wasn't just a wrongful arrest, this was a deliberate plot by a corrupt police officer. But the story didn't end there. At that moment, the door to the courtroom swung open. A group of FBI agents entered, led by a man in a black suit and sunglasses. "We have an arrest warrant for Officer Tom Whitaker for falsifying evidence, abusing power, and violating human rights." The courtroom exploded with whispers. Some jurors clapped. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Officer Whitaker panicked, jumping to his feet, his voice trembling. "No. I didn't do anything wrong. This is a misunderstanding." But the FBI didn't give him a chance to speak any further. Two agents approached him and handcuffed him on the spot. Monica stood silently, not saying a word. But her gaze spoke volumes, justice was being served. The tension in the room reached its peak as Monica's gaze turned to Judge Foster. She knew he was the last piece of the puzzle, the one who had failed her from the start. Her eyes locked onto him, sharp as a knife. "Now it's your turn, Judge Foster." Judge Foster swallowed hard, beads of sweat dotting his forehead. He could feel the threat in Monica's words. If he didn't handle this carefully, his career might be over right here, right now. I didn't know you were a federal agent." Judge Foster stammered, his voice shaking. Monica raised an eyebrow and folded her arms across her chest. "If I weren't a federal agent, would you have continued to humiliate me?" The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Judge Foster couldn't respond. Monica's words hit him like a sledgehammer, leaving him no room to defend himself. The jury shook their heads in disappointment, some whispering amongst themselves. Judge Foster's credibility had crumbled entirely. He had been exposed, and there was no saving him now. Another FBI agent stepped forward, pulling out a brown envelope and placing it on the table in front of Judge Foster. Inside was a document requesting an investigation into Judge Foster for abuse of power and bias in his rulings. Judge Foster's eyes widened, his face turning ashen. He frantically flipped through the papers, but there was no hiding the truth. This was the end for him. Monica stood silently, watching him with a gaze that said everything. She didn't need to say another word. It was clear that everything had come to light. Monica stepped out of the courthouse feeling a weight lifted from her shoulders. The battle wasn't just for herself, it was for all those who had been oppressed and treated unfairly. The tension she had felt earlier was now replaced with a sense of triumph. Justice had been served. As she exited the courthouse, she was met with a swarm of reporters, cameras, and flashing lights. She knew she was the center of attention, but it didn't faze her. Today, she carried a message far more important. Than fame, justice could never be defeated. A reporter quickly approached, microphone in hand. "Agent Carter, can you share your thoughts after today's trial?" Monica paused, looking straight into the camera. She smiled and spoke with unwavering confidence. "Remember one thing, justice is not a joke. And today, justice has been served." Her words echoed, quickly spreading across the media. It became a symbol against abuse of power and societal injustice. People began to see Monica not just as an FBI agent but as a hero for justice. Journalists continuously reported, sharing her story. She hadn't just won this case, she had exposed the wrongdoings of Officer Whitaker and Judge Foster. Monica had shown that the truth and justice would always prevail, no matter how hard someone tried to suppress it. Yet, Monica knew this was not the end. She understood that many others still faced discrimination and injustice. She knew the fight for justice never truly ends. But today, she had done what few could, she had proven that in the end, justice would always win. As she stepped outside, the sunlight bathed her face. A gentle breeze brushed past, as if the universe itself was congratulating her. Monica felt the strength of truth and resilience within her. She knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would stand firm. Monica's story wasn't just about one case. It was a lesson in perseverance, in standing up against injustice. She had proven that justice would always triumph, and no one could take away the right to live in truth.